Hello, Dr. Ron England here, and we're going to talk a little bit about Pandas and data. First thing I'm going to do is I'm looking here at the input-output formats. Pandas has got a lot of input-output formats, Excel, whatever, but I'm going to actually be reading some HTML tables, and we're going to manipulate those tables. So let's first kind of look at those tables. I have this HTML page where it has one table, which is the steam saturation property temperature table. Okay, that's one. And I got this other one here that is got multiple tables on it. See, lots of tables here. And it is the superheated vapor tables with multiple tables on the actual page. So let's go back over to here, and I've written a function that goes ahead and reads the HTML of the URL passed to it. And so I've gone ahead and put that function in memory, and I'm going to go ahead and execute the steam and vapor will be two variables that I'm going to run the selection, and I'm now going to have those two. Here's vapor, which if you look at it, it's a list of data frames, and each data frame contains one of the tables. Well, that's kind of nice. So there's a bunch of data frames, and each one contains a table in it. That's the vapor one. And the steam, which only had one table in it, has one table in it, and there's that table. Notice that you only saw one table, one data frame, which was the contents of one table that it got. So that's kind of cool. So we're going to be able to work with both steam and vapor and do some things with it. So what are we going to do with it? Well, let's next go over to the documentation for the data frame. So here's the data frame. And there's a lot of stuff that you can do with the data frame. Now, you got to kind of understand, first, a data frame is a class. Let's think about what a class is. In my example, steam and vapor are variables that are instantiations of that class. We often call those objects. A class defines what it's capable of doing. An object is actually something that does something. Okay, you can manipulate it. That's why I'm able to have the data frame object. I've got a steam and a vapor, and they're both data frames. They're lists of data frames. That's what's returned from the read HTML's lists of data frames. So I can do stuff with them. Well, the first thing I'm going to do is I've got to, I need really only the first table in steam. So steam1 is equal to steam of 0. That's going to be the first data frame. So I can go ahead and do that. Boom. Okay, and I'm going to do vapor 1 is equal to vapor of 0. Remember, they were lists of data frames. So now steam 1 and vapor 1 are going to actually be data frames. So if I were to type in steam 1 and look at it, it's a data frame. If I were to type in vapor 1 and looked at it, it was also going to be a data frame. Each of those representing a table from that HTML. Now, going back, let's review. Class. Data frame is a class. An instantiation of the class. Steam 1 and Steam 2 are instantiations of the class. They have all the capabilities that a data frame class has. Now, what are they capable of doing? Well, I've got things like here I can say the attributes and underlying data. If I want to know the index or the row labels of the data frame, I can go over here and do index. Well, let's try that. Let's say steam1.index and see what it returns. Okay, and it returns, it says there's a range index. There's some other ones here. I don't need to go back and forth to do this because I know a lot of them. Let's do columns, which is another attribute. There's a list of columns. I can do vapor1 columns. Okay, boom, there's the columns. I can do steam1.t. It's going to give it back as a transposed. T actually transposes it and returns it. So if I look at, or I can do steam1.size, okay, 588. So in other words, if I look at these attributes, I've got the ability to, I have the ability to get that information back from these attributes. And you can see there's some different attributes there. Now, what else can I do? Well, there's some other things that it's capable of doing. And notice that the documentation is organized. But let's suppose I'm going to find one in here that actually makes sense, like, well, let's see, ag functions on the axis. Let's see. Let's not do one of those. Here's one called abs. ADS, the absolute. All right. So if I were to be able to go back in here and I said steam1.abs, okay, not that it has abs, it's going to return the absolute values of the values in there. So, well, that gives me some capability. But you notice that the notation is this notation. It's dot attribute or dot function. Now, a function that's assigned to a class is often called a method. I'm going to use function and method interchangeably because it makes sense that, I mean, they're functions. But notice the notation. Instead of saying abs and then putting steam1 inside of that, it's steam1.abs. Abs is a function that it knows exactly how to work when using it with a DataFrame object, because steam1 is a DataFrame object. So I've got all these different types of objects that I can do stuff. And some require arguments and some do not require arguments. And as you notice, you can go through, I'm just scrolling, and there's a ton of stuff here. So, it's got the ability to just handle all sorts of stuff. So really a lot of capability of working with data. Now, if you want to actually get examples of how to use it, well, all you got to do is click on the documentation, and there's all sorts of examples for each of the individual methods and attributes that you've got for the DataFrame objects that you've instantiated. Well, let's go look at some of the ones that we're actually going to use for this example, because I did create an example here. One is I might want to get the column names of the DataFrame objects. So let's just use steam1, and I return the columns. Okay, well, that's going to give me the columns, but what I really want to do is I need to bring that back as a list. So I'm going to use the toList method of the columns. That brings there. Okay, now I know I got a list. And notice in the list, this is a list. It's got a bracket at the start, a bracket at the end. It's a list. It's an array. And in the array, it's got this stuff in parentheses, temp and degree C, pressure, MPa. Those are strings. You can tell the strings because they're inside of quotes. If they're inside of quotes, they're strings. And there's two strings, and they're inside of parentheses. What is that? Well, inside the parentheses, it's a tuple. Think of a tuple as kind of an array. And that's the best way to think of it. So I've got an array of tuples, or think of it as an array of arrays, and each of the elements in the array is a string. So if I were to say steam1 columns 1 to list, and then I was to say element 0 of that, it would return the first element of that list, which is temp C. And I could probably, I haven't tried this one here, but I could probably go one step, which it returned just the temperature of that whole thing. Well, notice I got a little function here that I've written that does exactly that. It actually puts the units and the property together. So I can go ahead and I can make that function, put that function in there, and if I wanted to get all the column names, I could run that function. What the function does, though, is it goes through the columns and it puts them into an array by putting the two strings together and making it pretty. Well, let's first do this. Let's look at something else here. Suppose I want to get the values of this as an array specifically. Well, let's just do this. Let's do steam1. Okay, let's return the values. Let's first do that. Steam1 values. There's my values. So steam1 values. Let's make sure they're all float. I can use the as type. Whoops, it's lowercase. As type method, and I'm going to specify they're all going to be floats. It's going to look exactly the same. Notice the values look exactly the same. And let's say I want to go ahead and then transpose it. And now you got the same thing, the values just transposed. Well, look at that. That's kind of cool. I took the object, steam1, I returned the values, I specified they're all going to be floats, and I transposed them all in one line. Because the dot notation, you can chain it. steam1.values.asType float.t, chained all those together. It did all the things. It returned the values, converted them to a float, and then transposed them. And then that's what, and I could actually say, you know, if I wanted to, I could set a variable, a equals, and then just do it that way. And now I've got a new variable a, and if I went back up here to a, I could look at it, and it's the transposed values as floats and transposed. Well, that's kind of cool. I mean, it got a lot of capability. The rest of my example of this in my example here is because it was a Steam table, I actually wanted to go through and I've actually got the column names as a list. I could get the column names as a list because I wrote a column names as a list. So I could say, and that's this function right here. But let's look at what it does. It takes the data frame that's passed to it. It gets the columns. It converts it to a list. It creates a blank array. It goes and gets the first and then the second element of the column names and then returns it as return value. And what that looks like is this. It's got the temperature and so, but these were in separate rows. Look, temp in degrees C. Okay, let's go back and look at that original data frame, which by the way is Steam 1. Has a row that's temperature and a row that's degrees C, but I put those together into one row because I wanted to, and that's made it a little bit easier to work with. So what it allowed me to do is this little fun thing right here. I can run this little chunk of code and run selection. And notice that when I used the temperature 50.5, it went through and it gave me the volumes, energies, enthalpies, entropies, all the properties at that specific temperature for the steam. There they all are. And if you look at the code, you can see that it even did the interpolation, because if it's in the table and it's not exactly on a value of the table, it will still interpolate to the correct exact value inside the table using the NumPy interp function that's built into NumPy. Now, quick review. Learn how to work with data frames. There's a lot of things you can do with them. I'm obviously not going to go through this entire huge list of computational stuff that you can do in there. So look at that. Great. Then let's go back to our code here. Okay, the data frame. The data frame is a class. Data frame is a class. Got it? Class. It's a definition of what the data frame will do. It's just data frames have the capability of doing all those things. To do it, you need to first instantiate a data frame. You need to create one that has actual values in it, like steam and vapor, which I read from an HTML table. Once I got steam and vapor and I got the data frames from each of those, I then went ahead and I had the capability of using those attributes and using all those methods to manipulate the data in a lot of different ways. And I can do it through a notation called dot notation. A data frame class that's actually the data, not the definition, but the actual data, is called an instantiation of a data frame, or called a data frame object. A data frame class is the definition itself. Okay, that's just how we use how we talk about it. And then you can see that I've got lots of capabilities of doing lots of stuff with some really neat examples of how to work through this. That should get you started. But to keep going, look at what you've got. Look at all the capabilities. And really look at it in the capability of reading data and manipulating data for real engineering problems, or in my case, getting information out of lookup tables very rapidly. Good programming. Hope you enjoyed it. That was my Python for the day.